on a subject that's a topical issue, which is the constitutional reform on the 25th March by Togo. Just a couple of announcements before starting. There's interpretation. There's interpretation available in French and in English. So you could choose the language of your choice and clicking on the icon, the specific icon on your screen.
Interpretation is available in English and in French, so you can choose the language you are comfortable with at the bottom of your screen. Okay, all right. Aujourd'hui, nous allons.
Today, I think it's 11:15. We'll start this discussion in two parts, one for the panel and then a session for questions and answers. Today, we have the honor as our moderator, Dr. Khan, Dr. Ibrahima Khan. Good morning, Dr. Khan. Good morning, Marie-José, and welcome. And Ibrahima Khan is a special advisor of the executive director of Open Society Foundation in Africa. And then he's in charge of advocacy for the African Union. Before giving the floor to Mr. Ibrahima, I want to ask the Professor Kwesi Prente, who is Director of Projects in Wademos. And then we want to welcome the panelists and all those that are connected on this webinar. I want to go to Dr. Kwesi Prempe. Dr. Kwesi Prempe, can you hear us, please? Professor Kwesi Prempe, can you hear us, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, MJ. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, all of you, and welcome to this webinar organized by the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS, in collaboration with our members and partners in Togo. We have only just recently celebrated the important transition in Senegal. But unfortunately, before even the ink was dry on that momentous occasion, we got another reversal in the region in the form of developments in the immediate neighborhood of Ghana, in Togo, which do not appear to augur very well for the progress of democracy in the region. So, as it is our practice in WADEMOS, when there is a development in a member country, in the member states of the ECOWAS region that we believe represents a setback for democracy and development in our region, we convene a conversation of this kind so that we can get first-hand briefing or understanding from our members on the ground, as well as experts who follow the particular country, and then through this kind of dialogue also try and formulate some ideas for a possible intervention or response. So this is the purpose of this convening, and I'm glad to see that a number of you have joined us. I'm counting about 48 participants currently, and I hope that this will be a very fruitful discussion. Like I said, we're very, very encouraged by what our brothers and sisters in Senegal have achieved in these last few months. And I believe that they are also participating in this conversation to share insights and experiences. Certainly Togo is not Senegal, but we do. It's on, but it's not showing. Okay, so the video is finally showing. So, like I said, of course, Senegal is not it's not Togo, but I'm sure that nonetheless some lessons can be learned, at least for us in civil society, as to exactly how we might act in solidarity in response to this development in the region. So, thank you again. I will just go back to my brother Ibrahim and ask him to continue the moderation for the day. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Kwasi, et bonjour à tous les participants. On est vraiment heureux de se retrouver encore après avoir discuté du Sénégal.
Thank you, Kwesi. A good morning to the participants. We are here once again to discuss a problem or in the sub-region and a problem in a country which is very dear to us. Togo is one of the countries, one of the small countries of West Africa with Gambia, but it's also a country that is very important because it's a country that has had the first coup d'etat in the region, which ousted the then president. I think that today, if we talking about Togo, it's the fact is that the country hitherto, despite all that has been done, continues to create some sort of problems. And I'm saying for the fact that there's a fact of its importance that happened. It's about 11 days time there will be elections in Togo, and ECOWAS, which is in charge of delivering a certificate of good conduct or bad conduct, instead of sending an observation mission, it's when it's rather sent a mission to be able to study and do a report on the facts or on the situation. And then it's on the 20th that this mission must be ended. That's to tell you that there's a serious problem. And then it's this problem that would together would like to examine and then understand all the ramifications of that. And then we'll look at how together the civil society, because don't forget that the activities of Wademos, as Professor Kwesi said, there should always be that sort of solidarity towards our brothers and sisters. And then it's a country that is very dear to us, as I've already mentioned. So to discuss, there's not a better way to discuss the problem of a country, but to ask the children or the citizens of the country to talk about the issue. And I think we have one of the very eminent representatives of Togo. I have Professor David Dossé, who is a surgeon, and then a professor of surgery, which is an important actor in the Togolese situation. He coordinates the movement for citizens arise, and then in Togo, and then he coordinates what we call the turn a new page on, and then that is in addition to his professional activities. He's worked a lot to so that justice and then impunity could so that democracy could have its right of place. Democracy will be a reality in Togo, and then he continues to fight for that. I think that it's been about 15 years, and then he has distinguished himself in the work that he's done since then. I think that his observations, the observation of Mr. Dose will be very useful. We also have the pleasure of welcoming Bridget, who's also a member of the Turn a New Page movement. And like David is also committed over several decades on the question of democracy in Togo, is the economist by training. And then Bridget, apart from the work that she does, with regard to Turn a New Page in everyday life, is also responsible for a company for strategy, and from that point of view, from the economic perspective, I think that it should also be very useful for us from the economic perspective. Apart from our two colleagues, two Togolese colleagues, we've thought about inviting other actors so that we could discuss and we have an in-depth discussion on the situation in Togo, because it's not just about talking about what is happening within Togo, but to look at the impact what on the sub-region as a whole. So we'll look at the neighbors. In, oh, I think that we would have the pleasure to hear from Dr. Kojo Asante, who's the director of CDD Ghana, who takes care of issues regard to corruption, social accountability, human rights, management of natural resources, and other issues. I think he's the right person to talk about all these issues, in particular the aspects, and then looking at the political coalition with regard to the national development. And then I have also the honor of having on the panel an analyst, political analyst, and an economist, which is Yediabi, who is the president of WATI. It's a think tank which is well known in West Africa, who is interested also in all the problems, issues that West Africa is faced with. And Gilles, before creating this structure, he worked in International Crisis Group, which is also an organization that is well known, which takes care of prevention and then resolution of conflicts. And then Gilles works on several areas. Apart from being an economist by training, Gilles also worked as a journalist in the on Jeune Afrique, the Jeune Afrique, and it's also resident in Dakar. I think that for about 15 years now. And then it's from Dakar that he follows all these issues in the sub-region. And then I have Blanche Sonor, who's also a lawyer by training, who's the president, chairperson of the current of the Watch Benin. And the fact that Blanche is also a Beninoise, it's also of key importance to us. And then finally, we have an expert of international affairs, which is only a journalist that is well known, who's also interested in issues, but is today a consultant, an independent consultant, who's involved in all what concerns media activity, governance, peace and security, and elections in Africa. So we have a group of experts who, to enable us look at, analyze the situation in Togo. Why are we in a crisis? What are the lessons? How is this crisis sort of weighing on the social, economic activities? And what's the impact of this crisis, not only on the sub-region, but which is West Africa, which is already in its crisis, with regard to the Sahelian region, and then the entire sub-regional. We have UMOA, we have ECOWAS, what do we do to be able to resolve the problem, and then he would enable us to be able to look at following the example of Senegal, because we think that uh, Senegal was at the edge of the cliff, but Senegal has been able to get things back on track. So we have about 2 hours. I think we have about an hour and a half to be able to deal with the issue, to discuss the issue, and then try and then look at how to deal with that. I want to suggest the following procedure. I would want to ask a number of questions to the panelists. The panelists would answer each question, maybe 2, 3, maximum 4 minutes, and then on the basis of what you have heard, and then that will open the discussions to all the participants so that we could have an in-depth discussion on the subject. So if the procedure, the approach that I'm suggesting, it's okay for you, I'd want to start with ask the first question to Professor Dose. Professor Dose, we know that all these crises started from a reform, a constitutional reform. Can you tell us what are the principal changes that were done to modifications done to the constitution, and what are the impact, the effects of these changes, of these constitutional changes on the democratic process currently in Togo? Yes, Professor. I thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'd want to thank the organizers of this forum. When I see the pedigree of all those who are on the panel, I am really, really happy to see the level of participation. I'm also equally happy about this solidarity that is being displayed, the African solidarity that exists, that enables us together to be able to think about a thorny issue concerning Togo, and then great interest for the West African sub-region in Africa in general. I want to thank Wademos. I want to thank CDD Ghana. I want to thank Mr. Khan. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Social Watch of Benin and all those institutions that I've not mentioned. Bridget, my senior sister, I thank you for the initiative, for making yourself available to talk about Togo. So quickly, would have, I think that 3 minutes to be able to answer as you indicated. I think quickly, I'd want to say that Togo has a constitution which is 1992, which was adopted following a referendum. And then it's this constitution that enables us to have that regulates the Fourth Republic. And then in 25th March, we learned that the parliament has adopted a new constitution, which would be for the Fifth Republic. And the question was on the procedure. And I'd want to talk about two aspects. This parliament, which had adopted a new constitution, came. Its mandate had come to an end last year, so it was in. And then second issue was that in the constitution of the 1992, in event of a revision, it did not mention a procedure for, there was not a provision for a change. And then the spirit is that when we want to change a constitution, you must return to the people for a referendum. And then we understood that this parliament applied a procedure, a review procedure, and then renewing that sort of constitution. And then I'd want to look at the two issues which are very serious. I'd want to repeat a parliament which has his mandate has expired, and then a parliament that is operating a review of the constitution, and then to change, to completely change the constitution. And then the most important aspect is for us today is with this new constitution that they want to impose on us, because I know that the president of the republic has not signed the new constitution, which was voted the 25th March by the parliament. So it has not come into effect. But if the process must go to its full halt today, Togo has will not go from a presidential regime to a parliamentary system. That signifies that the Togolese will no longer go to that direct vote to
parlementaire qui va élire ou choisir, nommer
who would have the real executive power. Other change. I think that this is the major change. The fact that with regard to human rights, that devolves from the constitution. It's a document that would be attached to the constitution that is being proposed, and then the modifications. Fight against corruption becomes a constitutional issue, and then the key issue today, which is which has aroused a lot of discussions and debate. There will not be presidential elections, direct election of a president, but the president of the president will just be sort of an honorary president, and then the head of the executive, which will be appointed, will be the one that will have the real executive power. Thank you for that. We'll know the procedure that has led to the constitutional modification, and then the parliament that voted this modification, this constitutional, is illegitimate because its mandate has ended. I think these are two key issues. I'll now go to Bridget. Bridget, why? Why right now? Why this constitutional change? What is the idea? What is the rationale? All that were presented as reasons, uh, which has been circulated in more of a clandestine manner. All the reasons that have been raised, it says to ensure stability. All those things don't hold because as David has said, just said, it's a regime. The father Nyasingbe and son Nyasingbe, who have always been in power since 1967. We cannot talk about stability when we have all these things there. We cannot no longer talk about the reasons that a change of government would also be something. All these reasons that they've advanced, these are untenable, and then to to put forward these ideas and all we've seen on internet and that kind of thing in general, when there is a bill, when it goes through and then it comes to the plenary for discussions, we find on the side of the parliament the bill, and then the discussion, and then the amendments, and then we will look at the reasons and everything. All those things are displayed. And then all these procedure are absent on the parliament's website. And then up to now, we don't have all these issues on the website of parliament. So therefore, to base my arguments on what has been said and what I've observed since, the, the civil society is working on this question of imposing a limit to the number of terms that the president can have. And then this is necessary for the democracy. I know that there are three elements that I want to know. The first one is that the regime that Mr. Nyasingbe has had is had admiration for the German Merkel regime. And every time when we say we should limit the terms, because the only way to give an opportunity to everybody is to go to elections. And then each time they say yes, but when we limit, is there a limit to the mandate in Germany? But the difference is that Germany is a federal regime, and then the democracy is well established. The government cannot just take 6 months to 3 months to constitute all that it has to do. And the results that they've had for the federal election. But when you look at the structure in Germany and the structure in Togo, they are not the same, because we cannot say that the parliamentary system is more stable than the executive presidential system. I think that there's a wish to change the 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 current president. He wants to be the president of a council, just like Merkel. The second hypothesis is that Togo has joined the Commonwealth. I think that there's about a year thereabout, and then there's the argument that they raise is that the people who defend the reform is that going to the parliamentary system is the kind of choose the Westminster system. But we find that in the constitution that is in force, the Republican status is not, it cannot be modified. So these two parliamentary regimes that is to put a sort of a monarchical constitutional system in place. So it gives that a sort of Republican form, but they want to put some sort of monarchy there. I mean, this democracy, Westminster system has nothing to do with the pseudo democracy that we have. The third issue that comes from afar is that the father of For Nyasingbe has an admiration for Kim Il-sung, then North Korea, who has a strong links with Iyadema's father. There were a number of transfer of technology between Togo and then North Korea, and maybe that is what has made for Nyasingbe is he's preparing Togo for the third generation of the Nyasingbe dynasty. So what is happening in North Korea? So we could look at two hypotheses. Maybe if for Nyasingbe becomes the council of the parliamentary system, the head of a parliamentary system, he will be there until his party maybe decides to maybe accept to lose the election, and then they will decide what they want to do. And then because they try to in a mechanical manner to manipulate issues so that they always be in power and then always win the election, maybe through force or through some sort of illegal manipulative ways. And then its party has always had a mechanical majority in the parliament, and then they want to perpetrate themselves in power. The opposition has always had a majority, but he hasn't always gotten the majority in parliament. I think that these are the three key issues that I want to raise to sort of enable us to understand the situation in Togo with regard to the rationale behind this attempt to modify the constitution. I think that if we look at the situation in Senegal, if they had also done the same thing, would wonder what would have happened. So I thank you for your attention. Thank you, Bridget. I also I can draw two or three issues. So that the first thing behind all these manipulations, there's the desire to stay in power. That is what you call like a dynasty. And then apart from that, in addition to all that, there's also a certain desire to organize the power in such a manner that that kind of elite that is in power would always have their hands on power, and then everything will work at their behest. Gilles, you are an observer of ECOWAS. You know with ECOWAS that the two explanations that David and Bridget have given us, they are an indication that this reform, as we said, will be held in 15 days. I think 10 days before the legislative election, parliamentary election, which should normally not be the case because ECOWAS wants that each time that we change the rules of the game, electoral game, that should be done by consensus. That should be done 6 months before the election. The second issue is that at the heart of this reform, there's at least certain key issues of the political system in place that have been changed. We've changed the form of the state, and then the constitutional text does not allow that we decide to create a new institution, a new structure, which does not agree with the architecture of the first constitution. Can we really talk about an anti-constitutional change? Can we validate the idea that for that is done in the sidelines, that is against the constitution, the 1992 constitution, and all the system that has been created? Because this new reform, it does not agree with the provisions of the constitution. Thank you. I hope you are following. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much, Wadimos. That is also our common family, because we are all on that net. We must be able to laud this initiative to have Togolese actors who are the most well informed on the situation. All that we've heard from our two colleagues from Togo, I think that it's very precise and it's very enriching. I want to thank them, David and Madam Bridget as well, and all those who are participating in this discussion. Ibrahima, maybe The question is not easy. What ECOWAS prescribed, and then this issue. I don't know whether the additional protocol, it's very clear that the provisions it forbids, and then it must happen 6 months to the 6 months before the election. I don't know whether it applies to all elections or to presidential elections. I think that it's somebody who knows very well the text can give us. But I think that we know we are before here. What we have before us is we are before parliamentary elections, which will become the most important elections in Togo now, and all that has been done with regard to ECOWAS. We have a lot of countries we don't have parliamentary systems, and then all that has been constructed with regard to all has been stipulated with regard to presidential elections. We must look at that because right now they are moving from the presidential system to a parliamentary legislative system. And I'd want to also raise that we have Lusophone countries, Portuguese country, the Lusophone regimes like Cape Verde, and then we look at Cape Verde. It's a regime that functions very well, which the prime minister leads, which has the majority in the parliament, and then we have a president also. And there, when we look at the Togo situation, you realize that the general elections, presidential election, will be a thing of the past, which is a problem because once you have citizens that are used to presidential elections, general presidential elections, and then so that they will have the possibility of expressing their wish, and then to deprive them of that right, I mean, it becomes very difficult. And then there's a necessity for having that general elections to select a president. And I think that once we have that as a right, it will be very difficult to deprive them of that right. Other observation that I could make is that I think that is because it's a sort of a trap when we have a modification of the constitution. We suggest changes, and then if you look at the text, I think that it's not even available for the citizen to scrutinize, and then the citizens don't even have access to this text. I think that it's really difficult, and that it lacks visibility. A constitutional text, which is a constitution, which is the fundamental law of a country, which is a synthesis of the values of the society. Everybody must have access to it. Unfortunately, that is not the case, which is unknown by the population. I think it's a major problem, and I think that the other trap is that to discuss the contents, the change of regime from a presidential executive system to a parliamentary system and other things, and then to make us forget that the real problem is a process itself, to have a constitution that it changes the in-depth structure without public debate. I think that is the key problem, because that it creates that sort of chasm between the citizens and then the political leaders. When we talk about the legal issues as stipulated by the constitution, we see that there's a trap. Then we'll say that the parliamentarians whose mandate have ended, how can they vote a new constitution? And then would fall into the trap, because there's legal issues there, and then it's a violation of the meaning of democracy itself, because we don't have any debate or dialogue before the changing of this regime. I mean, and then the last thing is the political history. I think that Madame has talked about that. We cannot talk about Togo without looking at the constitutional issues. If we don't look at when we look at Fonya Singbe in 2005, a lot of Togolese were young. We look at the age of Fonya Singbe, how he came to power after his father, and then Togo has not had a real change of government for decades. And then that will enable us to have a discussion, an in-depth discussion on the political situation, whether we respect the constitution, whether we respect the constitution or not, or the change of constitution. It's a change of constitution. It's not a review of the constitution. So it requires a lot of work. It's not just explanation. It requires, as a prerequisite, a debate by the citizens. Thank you, Jill. Although you have not answered whether it's anti-constitutional to change this constitution, but I think that you've given us some insights, and I think that your points are also very. If I could say, I don't know whether the question an anti-constitutional change or not, but I think that looking if there's a constitution in place, we cannot say it's an anti-constitutional change of government with regard to when they want to have parliamentary elections, which are looking at the issues of how to go about elections. But if that is the case, we could think that the legislative election could also be won by the opposition, and then maybe the future prime minister will come from the opposition. So I think that it's sort of a trap to just look at the just the respect of the constitution, maybe the procedure that they followed. I don't think that is an anti-constitutional change, but it's the manipulation and that seeks to prolong Nyasingbe dynasty that has happened over a number of years. Kojo, I think it's good for from an observer, from hindsight, an observer who looks at from a distance, maybe an Anglophone national who's looking at the Francophone system, which is quite foreign, but has some reflections of that. I'd want to also ask you the question that how do you look at this change? How do you look at this attempt of President Faure? How do you assess that? Look as an observer from a distance.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning to. Hope it's still morning. Good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
First of all, I think we need to put the developments in Togo in context. And I, as a Ghanaian, I am actually happy that for the first time since I've been engaged in the governance sector for all these years, that Ghanaians can take an interest in what happens in Togo, which is a neighbor. We've always tried to, even though we are surrounded by Francophone countries, we don't normally engage on the subjects of democracy and governance at the civil society level on these issues, and that's why I think the current platforms and opportunities we have, we should continue to deepen them. But the context that I wanted to bring into this conversation is we just came from COVID in 2020, and then in 2021 we were confronted with the Guinea coup. And one of the things that emerged from the Guinea coup, if you look at the heads of states communique after the extraordinary meeting after the Guinea coup, that they made proposal to ECOWAS Commission to review the protocols on democracy and governance, to see how we can deepen some of the commitments to democratic change. Because The behavior of Alpha Conde in the run up to the coup, everybody recognized that maybe if they had interfered early, we wouldn't have had a coup in Guinea. People died protesting for constitutions in Guinea. And the heads of states recognized, and Paul Nasibe was present at that extraordinary meeting. And the communique very, very clear. If you even look at uh, the African Union statement, and if you look at point 13, which I think for me is also very instructive, it says the AU Commission, the request the AU Commission to undertake a comprehensive and objective analysis focusing on the root causes and the impact of unconstitutional change of government arising from non-consensual and or politically manipulated democratic process. So if you look at the current protocols, for example, the supplementary protocol on democracy, the ECOWAS one, where we talk about constitutional changes, it speaks to almost like military unconstitutional changes. But in the light of the Guinea coup, there is a recognition that there are also constitutional coups that we have been experiencing. People attempting to extend their third term. We've just come from one in Senegal, and it took civil society's efforts to overcome that. So we are very clear, for me, I'm very clear that we are coming from a place where we recognize that these kinds of manipulations are also undemocratic and should have the same level of attention and an intervention from the ECOWAS heads and other multilateral platforms that we have, like we do for military coups. And there have been enough of them for us to suggest to us that they always continue to threaten the peace and stability of the sub-region. And I will refer you to the AU Charter on the democracy, governance, and elections. And if you look at the sanctions regime that are contemplated under Chapter 8, Article 23, and you look at number 5, where one of the things that will be considered as unconstitutional change is any amendment or revision of the constitution or legal instruments which is an infringement on the principles of democratic change of government. So in essence, for me, and Togo is a signatory to the African Charter and ratified it as well. The AU has to have an interest in what is going on in Togo. Because if we do not draw the line on clearly what is constitutional behavior and democratic behavior, we are going to sort of create confusion and give even the coup makers even more motivation to continue to do what they are doing. So I am thinking this is a perfect case. We have been going through this process since 2001. We've already had three coups. Niger was the recent one. There are problems with election and election integrity, and that's the sad thing about the Togo election, that we cannot even focus on election because of these interventions that have happened. But if we are going to have a handle on it, ECOWAS and other like the AU have to apply their charters, apply their instruments, apply intervene to make it clear what is democratic behavior. And I don't think there's any missing words what has happened. If you have a de facto one party parliament that decides on its own to propose amendments to the constitution and then proceed to vote on it unanimously and then proceed to implement it, completely bypassing the people. With all the history that Togo has, I think when you see a spade, you have to call it a spade. So I think we can play all the semantics around it, but it's very clear what is happening in Togo. And if we are going to move forward, we need to be able to call people to account. And I think that's what's happening in Togo, and we should make it very clear that this is not acceptable. It is not going to advance the ECOWAS of the people or peace and stability in the region. So I'll stop there.
Merci. Pardon, je disais deux questions
I was
avant.
saying two questions before allowing that. I'd want to go to Paul. Paul, is it that the decision taken by ECOWAS to not send an observation mission, but rather an investigation mission to be able to have an investigation, is it that it's a clear position that the ECOWAS has taken a position with regard to, is of a certain view with regard to what is happening in Togo?
So thank you very much, and let me join other colleagues in congratulating Wademos and other civil society organizations in the work they are doing, because it looks like, and it is said that if that politics is too serious a venture to be left to politicians, we have seen what they can do with it. And now it is now the job, the civil society and the population in our countries, in our region, we have to step up. Because what saved the situation in Senegal was the civil society, the activism. Because if you even read the recommendation of the Constitutional Council when their intervention, you will notice that some of them were verbatim what civil society organizations had actually said. And that tells you a lot, that if you had left everything to the politicians, I think they are ready to throw the whole region into crisis because of their selfish interest and their personal political ambition. So let me say that what is playing out, and I want us to step back, because if we concentrated on what is happening, what the reform that happened on the 25th, we are going to miss the target. What happened back to when Ford took over? I don't think many people will remember what happened, but it became a gradual erosion of human rights, of violation of human rights, and then putting personal interest above the nation, and then in pursuit of this dynastic misadventure, I will call it, because we are now talking about more than 50 years of the Yadema dynasty. Unfortunately, or it's an irony that President Yasigbe Yadema, God bless his soul, was one of the two pillars of ECOWAS. With General Gowon, they sent Professor Adedeji from Nigeria, and then Edem Kojo of Togo. They were the ones that worked towards bringing, healing the fault lines in the 16 states of West Africa. It's unfortunate that some of them are now part of those that are trying to destroy ECOWAS. Because what is happening now is a conspiracy to dismember ECOWAS if care is not taken. It is not just Togo that is there. Go back to when these constitutional changes started. Go back to Cote d'Ivoire, when 2016. And then people, the civil society and the population, they took their eyes off the ball. And this is the result, that if there is no vigilance, more will happen, and then ECOWAS will not be able to form a quorum at its meetings. Then go back to the Togo. Togo is there. Remember that after 2005, when he took over, he had the support of the military. And then in 2010, he just stepped back and came in, and opposition decided to boycott election. And that gave them the power. So today, you have a parliament that is dominated by the four-party or coalition, and that becomes a rubber stamp, that they can do anything. They can create, in fact, turn a woman into a man. What is happening today? Yes.
No. Can you please shorten, because we have only 20 minutes for the conversation, and I want to ask one particular question to David and Bridget before I open the door.
So what I'm saying is that it is a part of the plan to for tenure elongation. That is what is playing out, and it's not beyond. And it is ECOWAS talked about the supplementary protocol of 2001. Talks about non-tolerance, zero tolerance for unconstitutional change of government. I don't know whether it is changing it, that as it is. What is lacking, my brother, is the political will by politicians to act, to implement what they have all signed up to. And unless and until they do that, ECOWAS is almost losing all that it has. So we will talk more about it. Yes. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, Brigitte et David, vraiment en deux mots.
Brigitte and David, in two words, is it surprising that the mobilization, what we've seen, the process that has led to the they didn't had a lot of mobilization, people in the streets and that sort of thing. They banned demonstrations and things like that. It was rather repressive in nature. What explains this situation? And then what does the civil society intend to do so that we'll be able to check the process, or so that all these things that have been done will be invalidated, and then we could move forward with our democracy? Two words, if you could do that quickly. We can ask the question to know, why is it that with a certain level of indignation we didn't have that sort of mobilization when the civil society called for demonstration? I've asked two youths the question, and then you have come, you've talked about all that is happening, and I'm convinced that you were not mobilized. Why weren't you mobilized? And the youth said simply, because we are afraid, because 2017 and 2018 there was a law mobilization, but when the authorities, the government came out with that repressive move, since 2017 we have people that are in prison without judgment, arbitrary imprisonment, and so we are afraid. So a demonstration that we want to take part in, which is forbidden by the government, and then if we take the laws into our hand, we will be found in prison, and then we'll be mutilated or even killed. And then what will that change? We were afraid. So that is a key issue that we must raise. And then beyond that, we as a civil society organization will not stop at that. We'll say that people are afraid, people are not mobilized, so we'll stop. We must pursue to continue to criticize the issue, all that we said in 2005, a process of a change of a process of constitutional change, constitutional review in a very opaque manner. These are maneuvers that aim at what? Monopolizing power and remaining in power. the father Nyasingbe dies, and then in the evening we realize that his son gets to power in that same evening, and then we must legitimize that. We change the electoral code, which hinders the son who was a minister, to come to the parliament, and then by the approval of parliament, go through parliament, and then now become president. And then it violates all the rules of the game. Maybe he goes to the parliament, full Nyasingbe goes to the parliament, and then he becomes the head of the parliament, and then therefore coming to be president. So there's all manipulations. And then we'll talk about the article that prevents a review or a modification of that, which must create in such a way that the speaker of parliament, could act in interim when. And then you see that these are manipulations that have gone through. So we see that unfortunately there's always a tinkering of the constitution in Togo, so that they will guarantee their stay in power, and that has lasted for 55 years, if I'm not mistaken. And from my and then if we look at the additional protocol, the first article, the second article, I think that maybe if we have the opportunity, I could talk about that. Then I think that when there's time, we'll look at that aspect. So 2 words before we'll open the floor to the public. 2 words to say that, for me, if we could consider that the Article 2 of the additional protocol, the Article 23 of the Charter of African Union on democracy and governance, it's a constitutional coup d'etat, and therefore we want the civil society to mobilize, and then we'll be able to sanitize the system. What the Togolese are trying to do is just to take advantage of the electoral campaign, so that this legislative election will be a referendum against this review, this constitutional review. So they are just waiting for an opportunity to sort of sanction the government for this change, and they just want to take opportunity of this parliamentary election. So from 2007, they looking at supervision of EU on elections. I think that they've will look at the way of organizing the elections was anti-democratic, because we see that the issues are very opaque, and then the party in government has a way of manipulating everything and stay in power. So this mobilization of the Togolese population and the citizen will face the same problem of transparency, and then that is what we see. So the population would sort of mobilize themselves, and then during this election, parliamentary election, they will sort of now use it as a referendum against the government. So if you want to speak now, the floor is open. Now, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand, and then we'll ask. And then those who don't want to speak, maybe they can write their questions on the question and answer box, and then maybe we could look at that later. Yes, Kwesi, you have the floor. Maybe yes. 1 minute or 2 minutes. Yes, Kwesi, you have the floor.
No, thank you. Very lively.
Merci beaucoup.
Very lively conversation
pour l'entretien.
I just want to make
parce que j'aimerais juste faire
contributions. So of course, the Togolese
Les Togolais,
are trying to be. I mean, I'm talking about.
je suis en train de parler de
Yeah, I mean, they are trying to be very clever,
Fort Ignasigbe.
trying to
Ils
think
cherchent
that
à être
when you
vraiment
change
astucieux
from
lorsque vous
a
changez, vous
presidential to
modifiez,
parliamentary, then you no longer have to do
vous
term limits.
partez
Right?
d'un régime présidentiel vers
No,
Please
I
go ahead.
think that is a myth, you know.
Yeah.
So in the traditional conventional Westminster model, the prime minister, who is the effective head of the executive, is the leader of the party with the majority in parliament. So as long as that party continues to be elected to parliament with a majority, and that person remains a leader of the party, they continue to stay on, they can be elected many times. But you know, it is not true that there are no term limits in parliamentary systems. There are, at least in Africa, there are two cases. And maybe because the leader is called president, we don't see it as a parliamentary system. Botswana is a parliamentary system.
Mm-hmm.
In Botswana, when elections, they only have legislative elections, and the leader of the party that wins the majority becomes the president, but he's actually like the prime minister, like Angela Merkel, like the prime minister of UK.
Okay.
But that person has 2 terms in Botswana. There are term limits in a parliamentary system. It is possible. South Africa actually is a parliamentary system, even though, again, they call the executive, leader of the executive is called the president. The president in South Africa has 2 terms.
Mm-hmm.
It's a parliamentary system based on some form of proportional representation like in continental Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not true that merely by shifting from semi-presidential or presidential to parliamentary, then you can completely do away with term limits.
Okay.
So I think that is an important point to make.
Okay,
right?
Merci beaucoup. Fidèle? Fidèle Ayikoué?
Ah oui.
Allez-y.
Est-ce que vous me recevez? Vous me recevez?
Très bien, très bien.
Vous me recevez? Bon, moi, je pense qu'actuellement, on ne sent pas une
The internet has a challenge.
Oh, on t'entend vraiment pas très bien.
We cannot hear you very well. I think his connection has a challenge. I think that with Togo, when we're talking about some sort of presidential coup d'etat, constitutional coup d'etat.
No, on t'entend pas très bien.
No, we cannot hear him very well. There's connection. Fidel, can you write your question? Because we cannot just follow what you're saying. The connection is really bad.
On t'entend pas du tout. Écris la question.
Fidel, we cannot hear you at all.
You have the floor. Paul? Okay. Okay, please.
Prof,
you have the floor.
Yeah, Prof, I know we are limited in time, but you didn't even allow me to establish anything before. But you talked about it. I didn't address that because of time. I will say that if you notice what is ECOWAS has now been hijacked by they are not even allowing the at the commission and the institutions to do their job. The ECOWAS issued two statements. One was saying that they were going because of what is happening. Another one said no, they are not going because of what is happening. It is just to fact finding or whatever. It is not an observation mission. Fact finding is to find out. Togo is in crisis. It is there is tension there, and the police to go to find out. And I don't know why it is difficult for now violating the instruments they have signed up to. 2001 to call democracy and good governance talks about zero tolerance for taking constitutional means. What has happened? A constitution, which is the grand norm of a country, without the consultation of the people. You hear many constitutions about we the people, but where do you find in this constitution where there was not a referendum from Senegal, where people were trying to say, thanks on the opportunity. By the way, people are citing the AU protocol. The AU protocol was even borrowed from ECOWAS. If you don't know, it was ECOWAS that provided this platform, but today it has lost all those vibes. It has lost the political will to call its own political leaders to order. The political leaders have become renegades. That is the problem. So unless and until ECOWAS, all the institutions work according to the dreams, according to the objectives of the founding fathers, I think ECOWAS stands the risk of going into extinction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Paul. There is another Paul, Paul Meli. Tu as la parole. Oui, Paul, on t'entend.
Paul, you have a floor. Sorry, I think that Paul has a problem with his mic and with his connection. Can you write, Paul, your questions on the questions and answer section? And for the panelists, there's a first question of Mr. Kombate. How do we understand the behavior of ECOWAS with regard to its contradictory communiques that ECOWAS issued? I want to ask Yabi to give us an answer.
ECOWAS, AU, and the international community suggest for dealing with these problems. Ça, peut-être, je vais demander à David Dossé de répondre parce que vous avez dit qu'il est difficile à l'intérieur d'agir. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez demander à la communauté?
What are you asking the international community? What do you want the other actors, civil society in West Africa to do so that we could help our brothers in Togo? Then there's Abebe who has a question that, in addition to the point relating to the limit of the presidential mandate, whether it's parliamentary or presidential system, I think that it's important. I think that it's important to have the question of the presidential system. It's also another issue to look at seriously. He referred to an article with regard to the constitution of Togo. The Togolese are afraid to demonstrate their discontentment. How can the African civil society help the Togolese population to come out of this crisis and this period of terror? I'll ask David, and then Bridget next, and then Jill, and then finally at Kojo, and then Paul to answer this question. Fidel, if you can write your question, I think I'd pass that to those the panelists who have to answer so that they could provide some answers. Now you can take floor. I think that we don't have much time, so thank you very much. I'd want to go very fast. Of course, today there's a situation that at the national level there's a lot of anger, and we thought that would translate into a mobilization to say stop to this manipulation. But we know that Togo has lived in a tragedy for over decades. We're talking about from 2005, the year that the current president came to power. The Togolese came out massively to stop what was going on. But what happened? I've talked about the manipulation of the constitution, and then backtracking. We'll talk about ECOWAS that authorized the same regime, and then the same regime that organized the elections, and by organizing the elections, and then made sure that it could manipulate issues and then stay in power. And then the Togolese came out massively, and then they counted more than 500 deaths. And I think that in other cases, they were reported that there were more than 1,000 deaths in Togo because they opposed this kind of manipulation by the Nyasingbe dynasty. There's a role that ECOWAS played when the presidential election was to take place in 2005. They said, I know that there's a massacring that is going on. ECOWAS said the elections should go ahead, and then the Togolese felt that ECOWAS pushed Togo towards a tragedy. Then ECOWAS didn't recognize a role it had to play. Especially with regard to this tragedy that took place in 2005. We're in 2024. We feel that the same thing is repeating itself. There's manipulation of the constitution to know how they could sidestep the limitation of the mandate without discussing with anybody in an arbitrary manner. They want to go ahead and do their own thing. And I know that there's a lot of indignation, but the youth are saying that if we came out like we see in 2005, we were massacred. ECOWAS said nothing, and then the international community said nothing. If today we are the askers, then we must have some sort of safeguards, some guarantees that we will be protected. Then civil society, we cannot fold our arms and look at that. I think that this tragedy, this perpetual tragedy that is perpetrated in Togo must come to an end. I think that there are articles that show that this arbitrariness and then this anti-constitutional issues, it violates the protocol, the ECOWAS protocol, the first article of first section on the principles of the convergence, constitutional convergence. In paragraph 3, it says that all anti-constitutional changes, and then all non-democratic mode of coming to power or maintain oneself in power, it's illegal. And we are here facing the same thing. It's anti-democratic to maintain itself in power. The Article 2 is talking about a change of the electoral law, which is going to be done in 6 months. We know two key issues of the protocol which have been trampled upon. I will not talk about the different articles that have been violated by the Nyasingbe government. We know there is enough grounds that the international community would seriously take up the issue. We've had antecedents that have been serious, so that the international community must intervene and say, this time around, we will not fold our arms and look at it. So we know that ECOWAS must intervene. We know that there's a protocol that enables that. African Union as well must also look at, because when we look at the African Union Charter, there's enough ground for that. What could also do as a civil society organization, and we are also doing that. We organize ourselves with the West African Network to organize a counter action, and then to stop the regime from going on with its plan. We see that something happened, and then he was completely cut off. I think his internet has gone off. I think Bridget, do you have something that you want to add? Do you have an addition to make? To complement what David had said, I want to remind us of that the generations in 2005, all that is said in the attitude with regard to the behavior of ECOWAS. We realized following that there were a number of generals that were in place, like in Nigeria, there were generals that were in power. who promised, I think that to help the Nyasingbe's son to come to power. And then at that time, it was African Union which protested. I think Umar Konari, which was president of the commission, and then he made a lot of, he brought a lot of pressure to bear up to the point that the head of state Obasanjo had to, and then we looked at all that pressure that was brought to bear on ECOWAS, and then we saw the laissez-faire at that time that enabled the regime to go on. I think that this time round, mobilization of a civil society to on the institutions, there should be sanctions, and then that will be something useful if there are sanctions, because the ECOWAS appears to be, more clement in its approach towards for Nyasingbe. And I think that they should be able to do more. I think that ECOWAS has has and has. I think Nyasingbe has understood the situation, and then he is trying to take advantage of what is going on. And I think that it's very important for us to be able to act and act swiftly. Gilles. Yeah, Paul. Gilles, can you, Gilles? Thank you, Ibrahima. I think that with regard to ECOWAS, as Madame Bridget has said, it's very important to say that we see a certain weakness on the part of ECOWAS with regard to the Sahelian region, and we know the role, the position that the President Faure is trying to, act, being the facilitator of discussions within the sub-region, and then we cannot lose sight of that political reality in our sub-region. And then it's clear that there's an opportunistic tendency of Fou Nyasingbe, because when we're concentrating on the situation in Senegal and then looking at the timing, he felt that was a perfect time for him, Nyasingbe, to take advantage of the situation. I think that Ibrahima has also discussed the issue on integration, regional integration, the weakness of the commission, the two communiques that were issued from ECOWAS, the fact that there was at a time there was some pressure that ECOWAS, that Togo said there's no crisis, we don't need an investigation mission, and then that translated into the way the reports were issued. And I think that we are all in agreement that a lot of reforms must be done at the level of ECOWAS, and we know that it will not happen just overnight. It will take a lot of time, so that we should have an ECOWAS which is more credible, which will be a custodian of the protocol, and then the values that have been enshrined in this text, and then the values that the heads of states have signed. And looking at issue currently, we see that it's difficult how we would have an ECOWAS that will be more active and proactive to act on issues, looking at the situation in Togo. The other issue is, I think that it's important what David Dossé called important with repression, the crackdown, when we are in a presidential regime, and then, or whether parliamentary regime or semi, there are other documents in the constitution which protects the freedom. Then, but what we see is that they are just not respecting the constitution. It's not a question of a change of regime, but if the election, presidential election, is fraudulent, obviously the legislative election would also, if it's also fraudulent, a same system that we know that Togo has gone through over decades. And then obviously that hinders a lot of progress. And then the final point is that the example of Senegal is it's an internal local mobilization. It's not the ECOWAS that played a role. It's the external forces, the regional forces. We must look. They cannot replace the external forces. Cannot replace the internal mobilization. Senegal had a lot of mobilization from within, and then it was able to push the president out. But with Togo, the capability of mobilizing is very limited with regard to the crackdown and the violent repressions that they've and the tragedy that they've gone through. That is why they are not able to mobilize. That's the difference between them and Senegal. Thank you very much. We'll now conclude with some of the points that you raised. How can we help the population to mobilize? I think that it's a key issue that we must consider. Yes, Kojo. Kojo, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to.
I'm just make my point short. I think that for me, West Africa is in political crisis, and every step that we take is important. As the issues come, if we don't signal a change of direction, then it is going to even make the millions of young people who are losing faith in the democracy project in their various countries even more agitated and then maybe open themselves to other alternatives. So I think the leaders of West Africa have to understand that they are in crisis and they need to act like we are in crisis. I want to see President Tinubu, who is chairing ECOWAS now, at least from the last statements that he made regarding Niger and so on, to follow the talk with action. So that if we are going to stop these things, we everybody sees that we have come to a point where we are not tolerating these things anymore. And that is what we want to see from ECOWAS. If we continue to see the same old things and different rhetorics from ECOWAS, then we will not see any direction, a change in direction. So I think ECOWAS is a test case. We have other cases like Guinea-Bissau and so on. But we need to make sure we get this Togo issue right. At least let's make a very serious attempt to try to see how we can get a legitimate, proper democratic process in Togo to happen. We have to put the effort in it. So that's what I'm calling for. And I think that the international community, Togo is a small country. It might not be strategic in the bigger conversations of geopolitics, but in the context of the challenge of decline of democracy in West Africa, the challenge of insecurity in the Sahel and across Africa, we cannot just dismiss it. We really need to put the effort in it, even just to change the narrative, to change the trajectory of where we are for 3 years. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Kojo. Paul, tu as le
Thank you, Kojo. Paul, you have the last word so that I would summarize. Paul, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Ken. Yes, let me underline what is going on and put them into two, macro and micro. Micro in the sense that the movement has to come from internal. The Togolese themselves, they have to take their destiny in their own hands. Let's take for instance, when there was apartheid. Those fighting apartheid did not wait for external help initially. They had to do something. People went to jail, others died. I'm not suggesting that people have to die to get good governance. But if it comes to that, I think they should be ready. I know the regime is repressive. The military is not as professional as you have in Senegal, for instance, or other places. They have a track record of suppressing opposition, but the civil society in Togo and the population have to know that they owe themselves a living, not before the outside help can come. So I would want to see this kind of conversation, and then empowering and enabling the civil society in Togo to be able to resist. Nobody dies there twice. They have to recognize that what they are doing is for the future of the country and the region. And like Kojo was saying, the West African young people are living in droves, dying on the sea and then on the desert because of bad governance, because of poverty. And so to address that, I think it is left with the people to take back power. Power belongs to the people. They have to do it in a way that using all legal means. One is not suggesting any, using power unconstitutionally, but you also have to come out and demonstrate and know that your destiny and the future of Togo lies with what the present Togolese are doing. And so that is where it is. And for ECOWAS, now it is the time for everybody to also look at how they can help ECOWAS to help itself. ECOWAS is in trouble, is in crisis, because this is the same ECOWAS that decided not to observe the election in 2011 organized by Jammeh in Gambia, and did not recognize that result of that election. This was an ECOWAS that stopped President Tanja from going ahead in dissolving the parliament in Niger. But today, all that power seems to have evaporated because of the pressure of the political leadership. If they want ECOWAS to succeed, it will succeed. But if it doesn't, but the people can also tell them that whether you rig election to come there, the people have the last say. So let the people power prevail. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je ne sais pas qui adresser.
Thank you. I don't know how to, I don't know who to thank, our colleagues, Wademos, and all of us, and all the participants for having taken the time to discuss about 2 hours the situation in Togo. And the simple fact that we've all with all our concerns and our solicitude of the situation in Togo. And we were all willing that the situation should change. We all want that the Togolese should be able to take their destiny into their own hands and then create a real democracy in that country. And I think this shows our interest. And then the second issue that I want to say is that through the questions that were asked and the suggestions that have been made, there's from the point of view of the Togolese, they want support from the sub-region in their fight. A support, what form? Then we could talk about that. The mobilization within our states, mobilization of the civil society at the regional level, so that we increase pressure on the government, so that ECOWAS could act and show that ECOWAS is still alive and is still interested in the Togolese situation. How do we go about that so that all these organizations could act in an effective way, coordinated way, very effective way, so that we'll be able to tackle the situation in Togo? We know that the fact that ECO has not sent an observation mission, it shows to what extent the situation in Togo is alarming. And the third issue, it will be also important to take into account, especially how we will better inform the citizens of the regions, the organizations of the region, what is happening in Togo. David and Bridget have given us information that we didn't have on all the changes that happened with regard to the tinkering of the constitution, all that was done. The fact that even the text, they didn't even show the reason for this change. I think that it's important because that I think that talking to Bridget in particular, it's important that we should have all these all the necessary information so that we could send that to CDD. CDD could use all that information in its strategizing with regard to advocacy, mobilization, especially for the Togolese situation, and then how we could also use that or use that information to also do a lot of advocacy so that we could improve the situation. And then the sharing, information sharing, maybe the fourth point, it is next week, or maybe the internet is having a challenge. When we could have a day that we could organize, how do I put it? We could have demonstrations at the diplomatic missions in Togo to show in our sub-regions so that we could show our discontentment. We want us to discuss and identify with all our organizations a date, maybe one Thursday or one Friday, so that we'll go to our respective missions, the respective Togolese missions in our country, so that we could have demonstrations, and then show our opposition to what is happening. That I think that it's another thing that we could do. We could envisage to do that, and then I think that in the same line, it will also be important to do what was done by the West Africans with regard to the situation in Senegal. We've talked about Senegal, and the people said, yes, it's the mobilization within that led to that. But it's true that I prayed a lot. But what helped and motivated us and continue the compact and then to go in detail is the support that we had from others. Because in all the countries, the university community, the academia, and then civil society wrote letters of encouragement, support to the Senegalese community to say that no, they should not give up. They should go on to the end because their fight is our fight and our fight is their fight. We're together in this issue. And I think that it will be also good through Wademos so that we could ask in all the countries that the community, the academia, civil society, they write letters, support letters, solidarity letters to the Togolese population, the civil society, to assure them that their combat is our combat, to express that kind of solidarity. I think that that is also an important issue. And then maybe, and I think that the last point that I'd want to raise, I think that it could also good. Today is 11 days to the elections. Once that the elections will take place, or maybe might not take place, that we could meet to do an appraisal of what has been done and all the activities, so that we will be able to know what work we've done, so that tomorrow, if there's a new parliament, man, it will be so illegitimate that we could continue the fight, so that we could further strengthen the civil society, so that they could fight against this arbitrary regime, and then continue the issues to the end. So Kojo, Kosi rather, what we could glean from this rich conversation, which has brought together more than 50 people to discuss the situation in Togo, and tried to make some proposals. And I think that Wademos, as an organization that coordinates solidarity in West Africa, could take charge of some of these recommendations so that we could make progress. I wish that all the organizations that are present could also organize at their level what meetings so that we could increase or amplify the voices of we could re-echo the voices of the Togolese so that all throughout Africa and throughout our sub-region, we could know the situation in Togo so that this dynasty could come to an end. Because we cannot understand that we fought in other countries, so that there will not be a dynasty, but there's a dynasty that continues, not that it's thriving, but it's being able to hold to power. What I want to tell Kwesi, and then maybe I think that you would have your final word to say, and then maybe to say to another forum to be able to discuss in detail all that we've done. Kwesi, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ibrahima, for moderating this important conversation and bringing it to a successful close. I think a number of really critical points have been made. You've summarized them very well. I think for us at the Secretariat in Accra, Wademos, we will take on board. For us, this was really mostly a learning kind of forum, so that we'll take all the various points and insights that are made here to shape the response that we've already begun to draft. We wanted to listen to perspectives from as broad a spectrum of the membership of Wademos as possible, including notably from the ground in Togo. So we've actually taken on board a lot of important notes. I just want to drop the one point. While the conversation was going on, a colleague of mine, Dr. Adam Abebe, who is with International IDEA, dropped a side note, and it's a very important point. They've done some work on the Togo purported constitutional reforms, and wants us all to understand that even though in name the change appears to be a change to a parliamentary system, that it's just a kind of form over substance, that in reality, when you examine the proposed changes, what it is that the effective powers remain with the president, and that it doesn't really, when you look at the standard features of a parliamentary system, this doesn't meet the test. So I will share that information as well, so that we make sure that we don't continue to buy into the words or the language or the text that is used by the regime, and to pretend that this is a parliamentary regime that they are trying to implement. It is not. So I think that was an additional point. He couldn't make the comment, so I want to make it on the behalf before the proceeding ends. But we will share a piece that International IDEA has already done on the changes, so that as many of us as possible can understand its true implications for what's going on. So on that note, I would like to bring this discussion to a close, and to say that Wademos will be putting out a reaction statement, a solidarity statement, within the shortest possible time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and goodbye to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, and God bless.